Guys, what's going on? What's going on, guys? What is going on? It's good to see you guys here. Here, let me drop the link. So, guys, because we're gonna talk about World War One and World War Two today, right? And guys, once again, I put it in the Discord. I'm totally fine talking about topics like this, but you have to code your language, okay? You have to. And if not, my mods will kick you out. Okay? That's it. That's it, guys. Let's see. Keyshawn's here. Oh, and guys, can I just say that? Okay. What kind of man knows nothing about World War One and World War Two? Korea, I can give people a pass on because it's called the Forgotten War. But like, I would say, Vietnam, yeah, because it was such a part of our cultural zeitgeist. Because what kind of man knows nothing about World War II? Seriously? You know nothing? I can see these stupid chicks from the whatever podcast that don't know who, whatever, but like young Gen Z millennial chicks, but men? A decent man can talk with his friends about World War II for hours. Hours. Let's see. Suburban's here. Anthony's here. Let's see. Let's see. Flat Highway. Trent. Kojiro, what's going on? Guys, World War II ended. Okay. Do we have to have this conversation again? Guys, World War II was a formal declaration of war by countries, okay? We declared war on Japan, who was allied with Italy and Germany. Therefore, we were at war and like technically, like legally at war. And then Russia and Britain were our allies. When that war ended, that was it. When we signed the peace treaty with Japan, and then Russia and Britain and the United States signed that peace treaty in Berlin, guys, the war was over. Now you could say that the ideologies and the politics kept going, but the war ended. That war is over, just like World War I ended with the Treaty of Versailles. You know what I'm saying? It was over. Now, you can say that we are still ideologically and politically at war with the Russians, yes. But you cannot argue that World War II did not end. And guys, I do not believe that people were helped by aliens. I don't know where this comes from. Matter of fact, here, guys, I'm going to drop the link, right? Here you go. Guys, anyone who has come on up. But if you start trolling or saying stupid things, guys, I'll just kick you off. And then if you're cussing, swearing, guys, not coding your language, you will get timed out. Right? Because guys, once again, I'm more than happy to have these kind of more like, I don't want to say edgy because this shouldn't be edgy, but a lot of us have our own theories and understanding of what happened, right? I'm more than fine talking about this, guys, but I need you to understand that I don't want to get my channel nuked. I already think that I've been shadow banned by YouTube, because of the old AI slop algorithm change. Guys, okay, I need you, all you guys, the Germans of that particular time period, I need you to not type that word in the chat. Mods, give everyone 3 strikes. Guys, you need to put Germans of that particular time period or something. Okay, Trent, your camera's on. I'll let you up in about. Okay, guys, I need you to understand. You cannot say that word. Okay, you cannot say that N word. You can say Germans of that particular time period. You can say schmatzis. You can say anyways. Do not say that word. There's a whole bunch of no words. Say mustache man and not the H word. But just please, guys, please respect my platform. I don't ask for much. I really don't. Okay, so guys, once again, I don't understand, and I'm glad Trent's here because there's multiple people who have said that somehow there's aliens involved in like in the technology of World War II. No, there isn't, guys. Trent and I had a conversation offline and online about the fact that a lot of the inventions that we found, that were a lot of the technology that was used in World War World War II was developed in the late 1800s and like early 1900s. I'm talking 1905. These patents were actually filed in like 1899. There was just no necessity. There was no reason to actually put them into practical use. So if you have all this technology sitting around, and then there's this major world war, and the government says, "Hey, look, hey Trent, hey man, you're that guy." So we went to the patent office, and we saw that you have this type of airplane that can do this. Here's a huge government contract and as much resource as you want. You don't think Trent's company is going to make a new type of warplane in like a crazy amount of time? You guys don't think that they would they would screw Trent over and go, "Hey Trent, by the way, we saw your patent for this jet. Thanks for serving your country," and they're going to give the patent to Boeing or Lockheed Martin, and Trent's not going to make a damn dime. They did that a lot too. A lot of guys got screwed out of their patents and their ideas because there was such a scramble to actually get these ideas into use. So guys, I don't see any evidence that there's aliens and all this other stuff that were somehow involved. Blah 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 blah. Because guys, I honestly believe if aliens had the ability to get to Earth, we'd be so cooked. It would be the equivalent of the Europeans coming to the Americas. We would be so woefully outgunned. And guys, people usually don't go out and expand for peaceful reasons. Right, Trent? Like they don't go.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah. They would come here to clap cheeks and steal our resources. That's it. But this whole close encounters of the third kind foolishness, it's not happening, guys. Oh, there are these orbs in the air. No. If there was aliens, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm just saying it's improbable. Okay? And I think it's highly improbable that there was aliens that somehow eeny, meeny, miny mode aside on World War II and decided to just help one side of the war. So, but here, guys, let's do this first. Trent, questions for you. So, why are you so fascinated by World War II? And then wait, actually, here I will say this, guys. World War I and World War II are the single, because I call them like the World War. There was just one 10-year break in between. But guys, is the single most important event in human history.
Absolutely. Still is.
If you look at before World War I, think about how many empires that there were. Empires. The technology that was being used before World War II. The empires, right? There was still the Ottoman Empire, Britain, Italy or whatever, right? But before World War One, they were still the Austro-Hungarians, the Russians, all that stuff. So between World War One and World War Two, the fundamental way that the world changed, and the fact that we came out of World War Two with two major global powers. When before World War II, you had the Japanese, the Italians, the French, the Ottomans, the Russians, who else? The United States,
Hungarians.
Yeah. So, and then all those were whittled down to two. That is craziness. That is absolutely insane. Think about like French Indochina and how they became countries. Think about how many places in Africa, yes, over time, like were on their way to independence after World War II, because a lot of these African places became countries in the 50s and the 60s. The Francophile places, France tried to hold on to their colonies faster, obviously, but Nigeria and all these other places, they were like, because Britain kind of just faded away on the world stage. But what people don't get, there was a girl that I was talking to. This is years ago. You guys ever date a chick that thinks she's smart and she's not? You know what I'm saying? Like she's just not. And I told her that I think that World War II is the single most important event in human history. And she was trying to say, "Oh well, that just sounds wrong because that just means that war." Like she had this whole like war is bad, war is horrible. So it sounds bad to actually say that war is that important. And I'm like, but it's fact though. It's fact. It's fact. Like you cannot deny the fact that the world fundamentally changed technologically, social, economically, politically, right? From before World War II to after World War II. You know what I mean? So Trent, yeah. So do you agree that World War I, World War II is the most important event? And then also, do you agree that in the 30s, from when Mustache Man came into power, all the way up until Normandy, basically the entire world kind of led. The focal point of world politics, of world everything was Germany. If you actually,
you could say, yes. Germany had at that time, as a part of the policy under Mustache Guy, had put together a scientific and military system that developed a whole lot of technologies that were on the shelf at the end of World War II, and managed to deploy them as a systematic whole. That is, the Germans were in World War II one of the least mechanized powers. But what they did was they concentrated all their mechanization in 10% of the army, and they put a radio system across their entire army, so everything could be coordinated at once. And they did this before anyone else. And basically from 39 until 42, those advantages let them run roughshod over everyone else. And then they ran into Stalin and the Soviet Union, who had put together such a large military force that they basically held on against the Germans such that they couldn't win in the first year. And because the Germans could not win in the first year against the Russians, the West could give the Russians food and equipment to survive the second year. And after that, Mustache Guy was stuck. He could not swallow or defeat the Russians because he had everyone behind him starting, a huge industrial air war that most of the German ammunition in World War II fired, artillery, heavy ammunition, wasn't fired at wasn't fired at Russians or Allied troops. They were fired at Allied airplanes.
Trent, what I'm saying is, who was Time Magazine's Man of the Year? And was it 19? Wait, hold on. When was it? What was this? Was was it Mustache Man was Times Man of the Year in 1938. What I mean is, guys, so socially they were looking at German celebrities, German culture. Look at Walt Disney and Henry Ford, and how much reverence that they had for German business, for German culture, for German. You know what I'm saying? Like, what I mean is literally Germany was the focal point of the world in every way for that. Was it about 10 years? I would say more, 8.5 years. Wow. You know what I mean? It's like people thought that up until the attack, the aggression part, more so, they thought that it was a great place to live, and the world was like, wow, they're pretty darn cool. You know what I mean? And then I think more we're doing the whole hindsight 2020 to kind of erase the, never mind. We never thought that they were that great. We always thought that they were bad. No, if you read the articles from back then, you know what I'm saying? They were like, hey, this guy knows what he's doing, and these people know what they're doing, and their military is a in form of governance is a pretty cool way to do. This was everywhere, and there was even parties in the United States that wanted to emulate like that. Yes, there was a socialist party, but there was also that party that wanted to do things Mustache Man's way, who had rallies at Madison Square Garden.
Yes, exactly.
So
the German American Bund.
Yeah, there was guys. There's a guy who that I listened to. They actually have a podcast about like UFC and MMA, and they always laugh because they inadvertently bring up Mustache Man like once per podcast, and two of them are black and one of them's white, but because they talk about history and everything, and they say if you pull the string enough in modern history, you will end up in Germany in the 30s. That's how important. That's how much that the German model was looked at by the world. So, Matt, what's up, dude?
And that the West, the democratic West, particularly in Europe, had a crisis of confidence because of the Great Depression.
Yeah,
and you had Hitler marching in and doing all the stuff, and basically creating this Keynesian economic juggernaut, which was actually the Germans burning through all of the money that they had to look strong. And it took the money of the Czech economy, when they took over Czechoslovakia. Well, first they took over Austria, then they took over Czechoslovakia. It took the industry and the money of Austria when Germany annexed it to bring the Czechs down. The Czech money and industrial plant armed their forces such that they could take on France.
Yeah.
And the French and the British, if they had stopped the Germans from marching into I can't remember the name, the little bit of land that France was holding. If the French had stopped it there, the Germans didn't have the money.
Yeah.
I mean, they literally didn't have the money. It took the collapse of French will, the collapse of British will in Austria and Czechoslovakia.
What was that was Neville Chamberlain, who was the
Neville Chamberlain. Yes.
Beta Bell.
Well, Neville Chamberlain. The British are trying right now to say that he was a much better man because the British weren't so set up to take on the Germans at the time because they hadn't rearmed. I'm looking at it from the economic point of view. The Germans didn't have the foreign exchange unless they got Austria to collapse, unless they got Czechoslovakia to collapse without fighting.
Yeah.
They didn't have the money to buy oil from Romania.
Guys, here, quick poll. Anthony says what I say. Guys, the government, our government knew that Pearl Harbor was going to happen, and they let it happen.
No.
Really?
Yeah, they did.
Your government's also the one that enticed Japan to go out and bomb you in the first place by embargoing their oil.
Well, but here's the thing, though.
There's so much going on with the embargo.
Wait. But here's the thing about, look, Japan and the United States were going to go to war. That's how it works. The Pacific Ocean was not big enough for the United States and Japan. It wasn't. Period. This is not how it works, right? Like, we were eventually going to go to war. What I think the reason why, here, how about this? They didn't make it happen. They just knew it was something was up and didn't do anything to present it because it got us into the war. It look what happened afterwards, right? They had a projection of depression, war, we win, dominance. That's what I think.
Well, understand the Japanese decision to go to war with the United States actually happened in November 1940. When you look back in what's going on, that's when it happened. This was actually before the oil embargo. This was a decision that the Japanese Navy managed to get over on the Japanese Army after the Japanese Army got its ass kicked by the Soviets in Manchuria.
Yep. Because remember, Stalin said that they would not go to war with Japan until the European theater was closed. And after the war in Europe was finished, the Soviet Union moved their entire military apparatus all the way across Russia, all the way across Siberia, and into Manchuria. It's one of the largest military logistical feats of all time. Absolutely insane.
And
so not that I like the Russians, but you got to give credit where credit's due. So.
Well, that's why they built that empire on rails. That was its main point, their main purpose.
Russia's a railway empire.
Right.
Yeah.
They know how to move armies by rail.
Matt. Yeah. What's up, guys? So question for you. Why are you so fascinated with World War II? And then here, we'll go Matt, Fenris, and then Matt, and then Trent last, and then Trent, you can have the floor after this. Why do you find World War II to be so fascinating? And then why do you think it's so important for young men to learn about World War II specifically? I'm not trying to say that they shouldn't learn about other things, but why do you think it's so important for young men? I'm talking Gen Z, Gen A, millennials, to learn about World War II.
First of all our technology that we're taking advantage of, our medical history, all the computers, radio technology, power technology, nuclear technology, is all derived from World War II. Mm-hmm. And second of all, the very first thing into all war is the truth. So to understand that history is written by a series of observers, none of which are impartial. So we have to understand that too. So we have to question what's going on. And second of all, people who don't learn from the past are doomed to repeat the mistakes of it.
Yeah, that's true. Matt.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Why do you find World War II so fascinating, and then why do you think young men should be required to learn about World War II?
Well, it was like the ultimate expression of combined arms warfare before the implementation of atomic bombs and then thermonuclear bombs. It was like the cornerstone of how we expressed a fully industrialized economy that was applied to war. And I do see war as being part of our inherent human nature. World War II, if you can, think back about the different types of battles that played out, we'll probably never see, for example, tens of thousands of men in flying fortresses and fighters engaging each other in the air again, because now those types of aircraft are so expensive that it's literally economically prohibitive. In World War II, you had the combined GDP of the different nations all thrown together for the sake of industrialized warfare. And I don't think that we're ever going to see that again because with one bomber and one missile, you can wipe out a division. And that's the advent of nuclear weapons, and that forever changed the game. That made these large-scale conventional wars really unthinkable because as soon as one side started to lose that war, they would resort to nuclear weapons if they didn't resort to using them at the outset, right?
Well, there's just really fast. You guys know that there was a guy that I used to back when I used to wait tables. There was a guy. He was about Trent's age, and he was married to this hot Asian chick. He was like in his 60s when I first met him. And, he was married to this overweight, loudmouth chick, right? And then one day, I didn't see him for like 5 months, and he comes in with this hot Asian chick. He's like 70, she's like 31, right? He's like, I traded her in for a new model. Anyways, his business was he was a Vietnam War helicopter tech, and he would fix up the Hueys. He would go around like Southeast Asia or whatever and find them, take them back, fix them, and sell them. So the man was like a multi-millionaire. That was his business. He had a crew of guys, and they would go and scout these areas and find, because the Vietnamese and government, they don't care. It's just junk to them. So they would pull them out of the jungles or whatever and then fix them up. My point being, when in Vietnam, there was no front because we were so mobile because of helicopters. In World War II, a lot of times guys were still marching to the front. All right, everyone march. They were marching still. Yeah.
They're actually doing that in Ukraine right now, by the way. Drones have made it so impossible to drive vehicles that you have to walk.
I didn't know that.
Or you get killed.
Well, and the thing that has kind of evolved with Ukraine is that the front line isn't this limited engagement sector that was determined by like artillery. Now you have the Russians. They have to essentially slog through about 19 miles of drones, all different types of drones. Before they even make first contact with actual Ukrainian human beings. So it's this prolonged exposure to these aerial drones that carry bombs and even guns and flamethrowers and all of this other stuff, and mines and then artillery. They're simply whittling these Russian units down before they even begin to engage the Ukrainian units. And it's this predetermined kill box, and that has become 19 miles long, and that has really become the front line in Ukraine.
There isn't a front line as we know it there. What there is an engagement zone.
Yes, and that's what I was trying to describe for people that couldn't picture it. The engagement zone is the range of these drones, so it's not the no man's land that most people think of when they picture like a front line, like a World War I front line where you had one trench, a no man's land, and then
a no man's land, and then everyone goes over the top and runs at each.
No, they don't. You can't even do trenches anymore because trenches don't have roofs, and drones will come right at you.
Yes. So Matt,
even if you have roofs, the drones will still fly in. I mean,
Matt, but just before we let Trent, I'll pull up Trent's first presentation. Matt, why do you think all young men should study World War II?
Well, like I said, it was kind of the pinnacle of industrialized conventional warfare. and it has set the tone for how we conduct the limited war operations that we do today.
Yeah.
Everything that we do today was born from World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. And everything that the modern U.S. military in doctrine and practice does today is heavily influenced from the lessons that we learned in those conflicts. But World War II was the industrialized application of conventional combined arms warfare, and it is the paradigm that we still use to this day to dictate how we create our formations, how we train them, and how we employ them. And I think that understanding those set piece battles and how they played out across Europe and Asia gives you a fundamental understanding to then understand how things are done today.
Yeah, that's true. And like Matt, Finner has said, those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it. And it's just so crazy that people don't understand. I think that the biggest problem with Gen Z and millennials is they think that war is somehow unavoidable. They think that conflict is not part of the human condition. They don't think that tribalism or nationalism or anything is part of our condition. Guys, we are tribal animals. Okay? Matt has his tribe, Fenners has his tribe, Trent has his tribe, I have my tribe. Trent has a whole abundance of something of food. Okay, Matt, Finnish people are starving. We're going to invade Trent's country. That's just the way it works. That's just the way it works. It's unavoidable. Well, you could just ask him. And what if Trent says no? What are we going to do? Ask him again? Come on, man.
I just want to point people to the simple fact we are mammals, and this nature that we have in us, it comes from our mammalian evolution. When you look at every mammalian species, it's a fight to survive.
Yeah, that's true.
And that is warfare has become almost like the inspiration. It constantly is like our process of evolving our ideas, our values, our politics. That's what hones it. Almost like lions, how the female lions will only let the strongest alpha male lion in the pride breed. And that's why the strong in the lion world. That's why those animals survive. And it's almost like when it comes to conflict of worlds, and you're seeing that conflict of worlds and perspectives play out between, again, the West and Islam. That's nothing new. That's the process that I'm talking about. You're seeing our warfare in our internecine political conflicts. Those things are the expression of that evolution. That's how we became the dominant animal. That's how we became the dominant species on this planet.
Yeah. And guys, can I also say this? For those, if you actually go and study World War II, guys.
Did I lose you guys?
No, we're still here. Okay, can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
We can all hear you.
Matt, you there? Okay. So, guys, put a 1 if you agreed that Japan was 10 times worse than the Germans in World War II.
Ask the Chinese.
10 times. Ask the Chinese, the Burmese, the Laotians, the Cambodians, the Singapore, Papua New Guinea, the Malaysians, the Indonesians, the Filipinos. You know what I'm saying? Come on, man. Like they were 10 times worse.
From 1937 to 1945, the Japanese overran and captured entire armies of Chinese, literally millions of men. And at the end of World War II, when the United States told the Japanese to cough up all of the Chinese prisoners, we only got a few dozen.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. All of those Chinese soldiers were executed by the Chinese.
Yeah. Well, look at Korea. The Japanese invaded Korea in like 1905, around there, and they blew up all the Korean monuments, all the ancient Korean stuff, and they gave everyone Korean names and Japanese names, put everything in Japanese, murdered, pillaged, did everything, and then made it illegal to speak, write, and learn Korean for 40 years until they surrendered. Can you imagine the fact that Korean is still a language and a culture is a miracle. 40 years.
Koreans are stubborn.
Yeah. Don't tell my girl that, because I tell her that all the time. Oh.
Well,
she's probably listening right now. Hey-o.
Well, that was a setup.
But yeah, so guys, we can do a thing on general World War II history, but guys, really, World War II, there's more and more stuff that they're learning every day. There's more and more things that come up with documents, or they're still interviewing some of these veterans who were there on both sides, But one last thing before Trent starts, guys, who were the worst troops in World War II?
I'd like to say the French.
No, actually, the French fought very hard.
Yeah,
they were just out general.
Their ass. That's why you wanted.
No, it was the Italians. The Italians were terrible because A, they didn't want to be there, the actual men, and B, they got their cheeks clapped by the Ethiopians so bad that when Mustache Man asked for a complete report on Italian forces, they lied. They had to over-report their forces.
Well, because there's a reason why the Italians hit the Ethiopians with gas.
Yeah. So oftentimes, towards the end of North Africa, when they finally had to send in the Germans, they were like, "You Italians better go and attack. If you turn around, we'll shoot you." So the Italians ran towards the United States, and the British, we surrender, and started surrendering on that.
A lot of the British propaganda painted that as what the Italians did. There were several Italian units in the North African campaign that were hell on wheels and fought very hard. And in some cases, the only reason they lost is, the Allies came along with better tanks that their anti-tank weapons didn't work on. I mean, the Italians were behind technologically. They didn't have radios to the extent the Germans or the British or the Americans had. But a lot of cases, they had fairly workable tanks and they had well-trained troops. Their infantry forces did not have enough motorized capability. Their anti-tank weapons sucked, and they didn't have enough radios.
Which makes them the worst troops in World War II.
You
call it equipment.
Argue that the Chinese were worse.
Here, the least effective. How about that? But
they were the least effective Western power.
The French, people harp on the French, but you know what I'm saying? As far as being the worst. But then I actually looked and did more research and saw that the Italians were a lot of times there was a reason why Mustache Man had to send in German reinforcements. And it wasn't because they were just this ass-kicking bunch of dudes. They were just ineffective.
The Italian army in the Eastern Front was effective against the Soviet army up until around the Stalingrad campaign.
Yeah,
that is when they ran into a whole bunch of T-34s,
but that wasn't hard to do up to that point. I mean, look.
I wouldn't argue with you at that point.
Yeah. I still think that the Winter War with Finland is one of my favorite like war stories of all time. Like all these Russians are just getting annihilated by a bunch of Finns with skis. But do you guys know that technically Finland was a Mustache Man collaborator? Technically,
for most of the war.
Well,
but
yeah,
I mean,
they had
it's called the Continuation War in Finland.
Matt, unmute.
Yeah,
What are you hearing now? Say something.
I think that it's still screwed up on my end.
No. We can hear you now.
We can hear you.
Okay.
Perfect. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, but yeah. So, guys, let's let Trent start here. So, Trent, do you want to kind of give us your background?
All right.
My
old day job was working for the Department of Defense as a quality staff specialist, quality inspector, quality auditor. I'm also a historian, and I led a group, international group of 16 researchers in Australia, the United States, Japan, researching a secret organization within General Douglas MacArthur's Southwest Pacific Theater called Section 22. These guys hunted Japanese radars, and they were very good at it, and they made people like General Marshall and Admiral King look very bad because of how good they were and how poorly these two individuals supported MacArthur's theater. And as a part of this group, I wound up doing presentations on various YouTube channels, including World War II TV. And this is what you're seeing here is the presentation that I did for them with some of the members of the international organization that I was basically I headed up and was their PR face. And I arranged basically a lot of the researchers to meet and talk with people. So let me start off and explain who were these guys. All right. They were a secret organization inside the headquarters of General Douglas MacArthur. Let's see if I can get the slides to work. All right. Now let's try and understand the scale of the war in the Pacific. What you're seeing upper left and upper right is England, the size of England, laid against the Philippines and laid against the New Guinea, to give you an idea of the scale. And at right, you see all of Europe laid against Australia, to give you an idea of how big the theaters were in the Second World War. And basically going from Australia to New Guinea was the equivalent of going from the tip of southern Australia was like going from the tip of Florida to Minnesota in terms of size, to give you an idea of how big things were. The Japanese built a whole lot of radars in the Second World War. And I'm showing you here at left the chain home system. Everyone in World War talks about chain home. The British invented radar first. They used to defeat the Luftwaffe in 1940. Well, at right.
Trent, if I could
go ahead
and interject, guys. The idea or the research that led to radar was basically finalized in 1886.
Absolutely.
The first primitive radar was built in 1904.
Yep.
And then they actually had a working system in 1935. So these people act like it was just this crazy thing that popped up out of nowhere. They had been working on it since 1886. Back to you.
Understand that radar was one of the tools that the British were looking at. The British were bombed extensively in World War I, strategic bombing. Both German Zeppelins and German biplanes were dropping bombs on London. And the British were highly worried because the Thames at night, when you got a bright moon, reflected off the river, and it was basically an arrow pointed into the heart of London. So they had to create an early warning network to get their planes up in the air to face that threat. Originally, they had observers on the ground. Observers on the ground can't see through clouds. Then they had sound devices. And that kind of worked when the airplanes were slow. But when they got fast in the 1930s, they had to use radio to bounce off of airframes in order to see incoming enemy air raids early enough to get the airplanes up in the air to face the threat.
Yeah.
Right? That was the only way a small Air Force could meet a large Air Force, is if you knew where the large Air Force was coming and you could feed interceptors into that Air Force to attritionally kill more of the enemy than you lose. And because you're over your own land when you're defending yourself, when your pilots get shot down, they get recovered, they get in an airplane and they fly again the next day. The attacking force on the bomber pilots and the fighter pilots, if the airplane goes down, they lose the pilot and they're gone forever.
Yeah.
All right. The Japanese, in fact, had their own radar systems. They were about a year or two behind the British and the Americans at the start of the war, but they captured some American and British radars in the Philippines and in Malaya, respectively, and copied them and deployed them at scale such that by 1944, you can see those are maps in the center and the right showing all the Japanese radars. And they had a radar network in the Philippines was bigger than the radar network the British had in 1940. They were pretty damn good. Now, you hear a lot about, the Navy saying, they weren't as good as the Allies. It's like, well, yeah, but they still were quite useful for getting Japanese airplanes in the air, and more importantly, alerting Japanese anti-aircraft guns where the Allied planes were coming from in order to set up and shoot. All right, the Japanese had a whole lot.
Hold on, guys, please stop. Don't type in all caps in my chat. Okay.
All right, I'm not seeing the stuff because
no, you're fine. I have to run a show, Trent. So
okay,
you're fine. Don't type it all caps in my chat. Okay, that's one of the rules, guys. Just type it regular, and you're fine. But guys, don't. Okay, it's just not a good. Just don't. Trent, back to you.
All right. The Japanese developed a whole series of radars. They covered 5 different frequency ranges, and what you see at left is various pictures and drawings of Japanese radars on ships and on the ground. You see there a Japanese battleship right before it went into the Leyte Gulf that had basically 4 or 5 different radar sets on it. And I'm pointing to the various places on the ship in that photo where they were located. The really interesting thing is the 2-meter band that is in the middle of the presentation. The Type 11s, the Type 12s, Type 13s also were on the same frequency as America's identification friend or foe. So when they turned on their radar that only reached 90 miles, they set off our identification friend or foe at as much as 300 kilometers, which is like 200 miles. And they could see our radar, see our airplanes at much longer ranges. We didn't know that until late in World War II. So the Japanese were using our own identification friend or foe. When you have a radar, you've got to have a beacon on your airplane to say, I'm friendly. That's identification friend or foe. When we adopted the British identification friend or foe system, it just so happened to be where most Japanese radars were located. And we lost a whole lot of airplanes because of that in World War II. What you're seeing here is the center of gravity for the first half.
Ultra MAGA. Dude, hey, buddy. Here, if you think Trent doesn't know what he's talking about, here, call in, pal. Here you go. Here.
Come on, we're here. Talk to me.
Yeah. Come on up, buddy.
Come on up.
Yeah. Come on up. There's a link. If you think Trent, who's presented this in front of, actual government agencies and colleges and or whatever, let's see what your little Google search that you've done, how you qualify more than Trent does.
It's crazy. I actually understand how all of this works because that's part of my engineering background.
Well, good comment, man. if you contribute,
you have the history. I just understand how it works. That's
okay.
That's a difference. You're the historian. I'm the engineer.
All right.
Well, I'm saying, guys,
engineers can contribute.
Anyone who disagrees or whatever, I find it funny that there was that one B-dub that called into the show, and I have to give her credit because she disagreed with me or whatever. Fine, but guys, it's so funny that even when we were having like 400 or 500 people in the chat, and there was clearly haters, no one ever hits on my StreamYard link to talk, have a dialogue. You know what I'm saying? So if Ultra is still in the chat, hit the StreamYard link. Trent's here. He wants to smoke. You know what I mean? But I have no reason to doubt him. Guys, here's the thing. Okay. I didn't even know this was true. So I can't go from I didn't know this to say, like, okay, just because I hadn't heard it doesn't. If I'm going to say Trent's wrong, I have to come with evidence to say he's wrong. If someone just says, well, I did in my feelings and feel like it's an old treatment, it's ridiculous. Guys, what do you, even if this is your first time hearing this, what do you have of, like, what reason do you have to think that Trent's lying? And that's what I don't like as bad faith people. I don't like it. And guys, and here's another thing too. Trent's not saying anything controversial. How is the Japanese having radar? Like, that's just, that's not trying to flip the narrative of the war on its head. You know what I'm saying? Like, what? Why would he lie about this? Anyways, Trent, back to you.
All right.
It just pisses me off when, like, someone like you just decides to take time out and actually, drop knowledge, and then there's just some hater that's just like, like, what have you contributed? Okay, Trent, Matt. Have you guys ever worked with like a group of people, and you propose an idea, and there's that one hater who's like, that's not going to work, and then you propose another idea, that's not going to work. Then you're like, what do you want to do? I don't know. It's like, then shut up. You're not doing. You're all you know is you don't know. You don't like what I gotta say, but you have nothing to add. I hate those sorts of people. Sorry, Trent.
Oh my God, have I ever seen a lot of that garbage in engineering? It makes
yes.
I'm going to end up in handcuffs again.
All right,
Trent, the floor is yours, my friend. Sorry to go off on that tangent,
AJ,
but
it's your show. I'm here as a guest.
What I'm saying, if anyone has anything to say about what Trent says, guys, hit the StreamYard link and talk to him, because I'm telling he's Trent wants to smoke. He's there for it. So, all right, my friends, all yours.
All right. A lot of what we know about the Japanese is colored by our 60s and 70s movies. All right. And at that time, radar was classified. I mean, talking about it was a secret weapon. All right. It's only been in basically since 2000. Well, actually, no, second term of Bill Clinton, that a lot of the files that were classified after the Cold War were declassified. A lot of what fell out was what the Japanese were doing with radar.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out quite a bit. In the Southwest Pacific, in 42 and 43, the Allies found there were like 34 different Japanese radars by June of 43. And the Japanese densest belt of them was around Rabaul. Fortress Rabaul was the major base the Japanese projected power from, down into the Solomons, into New Guinea. It had the most air power, it had the most troops, it had the biggest basin for shipping. It was protected by a bunch of radars. And what you see there is a table, gives the effective range of each radar for one aircraft, 3 single-engine aircraft, or more than 3 aircrafts. And each of those radars were capable of addressing our IFF and allowing the Japanese to detect radar at 180 miles or 300 kilometers. And this enabled the Japanese to always get air power in the sky over a ball for incoming air raids, which is why every time the Allies went in, they were taking damage. There was a long, grinding, attritional struggle until we finally killed enough Japanese pilots that their air power collapsed.
And those zeros were no joke.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
With good pilots,
yes,
they could still beat Hellcats over Iwo Jima.
Towards the end of the war, we had better planes, and also there wasn't, like Trent had said, there wasn't a lot of good pilots. But those things were, man, they were quite the menace.
You don't want to get into a turning fight with the Zero. You will lose every time if you are a Western airplane.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Section 22 was created by a couple of dudes. The guy you see on the right is General Spencer Ball Aiken. He was MacArthur's chief signal officer in the theater. The guy at left is an Australian named Joel Henry Mace. The two of them together created Section 22. Mace started it in the Australian Navy, and he convinced the Royal Australian Air Force, Army, and the American Navy to work together with him to create this intelligence organization that was going after Japanese radar. When Aiken found out about it, he pulled it into Section 22's headquarters. And
I have a question. What did they assume at the time, that there was a bunch of radars off the coast of Japan?
What happened was the Australians were involved in hunting German radars inside the Royal Navy.
Okay.
And the early capture of radars at Guadalcanal, the Australians said, we're hearing things. We need to have something, if only to be able to deal with German radar. And then suddenly, when the Marines landed in Guadalcanal, they captured a Japanese radar.
Oh.
And at that point was, oh shucks, oh snap. The Royal Australian was involved with the Channel Dash in February 42. And they put together a working committee in November of 42. And that's exactly when the Marines got that radar. And it's like, oh, sugar. We have got to put together an intelligence organization to deal with Japanese radar. And and Mace did it. I mean, he was the founding, he was the catalytic agent. He was like a crystal of sugar in an oversaturated solution. And everything immediately froze around him. And he ran with it. And Aiken said, I need you, if only to have control. And in September through December 42, at Mace's direction, he got a bunch of guys in a international unit to go start hunting Japanese radars with Catalinas, with Hudsons, with B-17s, with B-24s. You're seeing behind you Dirty Gertie, which was a B-24 that went out and started hunting Japanese radars. And there's the flight crew. And we don't have the names for all the people in that crew. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So almost like an early version of the Wild Weasel Air Force mission.
Yes, exactly. You called it exactly.
So they had a thing on the plane that could intercept radar signals,
exactly.
And then, but how exact was it? It would just tell them like the general area.
It was very inexact. They had to do lots of circling and flying in different directions to try and figure out how close it was.
So I have a question for you. How would they not get shot down when they were trying to find the radar?
A lot of times we were flying at night, and the Japanese didn't really have good night fighters.
That's still ballsy, though, to fly into a bunch of radar.
They were basically going out and trolling and seeing if they could listen to it and find it, and hoping they didn't get shot down.
Okay.
All right. And go ahead.
I'd just like to add something here. One of the ways that they were hiding, or Japan and Germany were hiding their radar stuff, was if once they detected a armada on its way, they could actually just turn off the radar entirely, It is only until the radar system transmits that you could actually triangulate the location.
Exactly.
So you could turn it into a receive mode. I don't know if they had receive mode stuff back then. Some of the stuff, newer stuff in the 80s, you could actually pick up the distortions out of engines and other radio equipment. So that way it could reflect it back to the receiver. But back then, when they're using all the vacuum tubes and stuff, all they had to do was momentarily turn it off, so that way it'd be harder to detect. But I don't know if that was part of their strategy.
One of the problems that they had was they had to figure out what was causing the noise. A lot of they had radio engines with lots of spark plugs. All right, a lot of the spark plugs were giving off RF energy that was on the AM band where some of these radars and radios were operating, and they had to figure out shielding for the engines. This was, living by doing, living by dying, learning by dying. All right, it wasn't easy. They just had to keep doing it and figuring it out, and sometimes it got people killed. That's just the nature of war.
Yeah. Did you ever see Masters of Air, Trent?
Yes.
Or Matt? Or
no,
Offenders. So that's like the third kind of Band of Brothers show. Yes. It was about the B-29s over
B-17, but yeah.
Yeah, sorry. And there's a scene where the British guy is like, "You're going to fly during the day? Are you suicidal?" It's like, bro, because the British had been trying to fly night missions and they kept missing. So the Americans were like, "We're just going to fly during the day and do what," and they were like, and that's when those British guys were like, the balls on these Americans, like they're gonna actually fly over enemy territory and freaking at high noon, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
and drop bombs and fight their way back. Like, you Americans are insane. Because what did I always say? Trent, Matt, and Offenders. You guys remember The Mummy?
Yeah,
the movie. Do you remember the scene on the riverboat on the Nile where the assassins jump on the boat where all of the people trying to find the tomb are, and everyone's running, but the Americans flip over a table and they have revolvers. Yeah, they're all shooting everything. Because Americans, we're cowboys. They say that when the Germans had to surrender to the Americans, when all these generals had surrendered, a bunch of ragtag, hadn't shaved in a while, troops came up from the American side. Like, we got beat by these guys. And I always say that America to Germany was kind of Kirk to Spock. Spock talks about logic and reason, but Kirk, he's a cowboy, right? There was multiple times where the Americans were surrounded or they were whatever, and the Germans, like, the only logical thing for them to do is to surrender or retreat. And the Americans said, we're going for it. They're like, hey, Commandant, the Americans are attacking. What will we do?
What did you say? Ed Bastogne was a good example.
Yeah. There was no reason logically that they shouldn't have surrendered. None, except for the fact that we are Americans, and that's just not oftentimes not in us. We will do the most unlikely thing, and that's one of the best parts about the whole Spock and Kirk thing is Kirk always says, look, just because you say there's 99.9% chance that it won't work, that 1% chance is still there. Might as well roll the dice, And there are times
was using a lot of World War II stereotypes.
Yeah.
In Star Trek, a lot of this stuff that you see on the bridge. Every time you see Spock looking over that triangular thing that was lighting up his eyes, that was actually from an SCR-268 radar. That was a World War II sensor that he put on the bridge of the Enterprise.
Nice.
You guys have seen Aliens. You guys have seen Aliens, right?
Yeah.
James Cameron, Aliens is a representation of Vietnam.
Yes.
Where you have the Marines and all the technology, and they thought that they were Billy Badass, and then they went, the aliens lair was a steamy, hot thing like the jungles of Vietnam, and they went in there overconfident into the aliens' nests, which is the jungle, and bad things happened. So he was using that kind of as an allegory for Vietnam. Anyways, back to you, Trent.
All right. Well, another thing that the Americans tend to do in World War II was steal a lot from the British. And Section 22 was wound up using a large number of Royal Navy people. You're seeing a list here and a picture of them. And these were the guys that were the basis for Section 22. And they wound up training Australians and Americans in how to use their equipment to find radars. All right. You're seeing here the Radio Countermeasures Training Center in Australia called Rushcutter. You're seeing one of the major trainers. Right. Basically, this place wound up training lots and lots of operators for the United States Army Air Force, and later on for the Royal Australian Navy and for the American Navy. Now, this is what one of those wild weasels looked like in World War II. The guy on the left, that is his operating station, where he's operating RCM equipment in the back of the plane. All right. You're seeing at right where that is located in the airplane. The early instruments weren't visual. You didn't have an oscilloscope or a screen. You were listening basically in a headphone and telling the pilot to turn left or right to try and get on the signal, to try and locate it. It was really a very difficult thing to do. The technology improved during the war. All right, what you're seeing here is where one of the major RCM units called Field Unit 6 was put together, and you're seeing Dick Dackney. He's Duquet, I think is how, I'm not sure if Dackney or Duquet. He's an Australian radar operator for which there is a book that one of the guys that I work with wrote about. I can't remember. I think it's called Radar Gunner. And he wound up in 1943 going as far as Balikpapan from Northwest Australia in the vicinity of Serembaya looking for Japanese radars. At right, you're seeing Dick and the crew of the Juarez Whistle that went out and did that searching. All right. What you're seeing here is, if you have an organization, you've got to have an org chart. All right. What you're seeing at left is who was responsible for doing what. All right. You're seeing the commander-in-chief, that was MacArthur. You're seeing under him the fleet units, the Commonwealth Naval Board, Australia, and then you're seeing all the Central Bureau, which was code breaking. You're seeing where the RCM officers, radio countermeasures officers were located. That was the org chart early on in February of 43. At right, a few months later, they changed it up. All right. We're going to have one radio countermeasures unit, and we're going to have different sections doing intelligence, doing radar, doing radio, doing training and materials. And, as a unit grows, it's got to change its organization. You're just seeing how that organization changed.
Trent, question. Okay, so Suburban, hey, bro, we, up until what? Help me out, Trent. The 80s, we had a very robust selection system when it came to immigration.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So I think Suburban.
Actually, it's until the 60s, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. But until the 60s, guys, you had to seriously be like vetted to say, look, you can contribute this to our society. Meaning you had to be, educated. You had to be, seriously propose what you can do for our society. That changed in the 60s, like Trent said. Trent, why did it change? Other than this bad policy, I'm not sure.
There was a change in immigration laws headed up by Ted Kennedy. And this opened up immigration, and specifically it opened up chain migration. If someone came here, he could bring his wife, then his kids, then his grandmother, then his father, then his cousins. That's chain migration. And that's why you've got right now 40 million Mexicans in the United States.
Yeah, it says
that, like 20% of the Mexican population.
Due to the passage of the Immigration and Nationality Act, the Hart-Keller Act, prompted by civil rights movement and Cold War foreign policy, Congress had abolished discriminatory national origins quotas that favored Northern Europeans and replaced them with a system that focused on family reunification and job skills. And I'm assuming that that's because they thought that if they that Russia or the Soviet Union would try and attract qualified people from the rest of the world, maybe. I'm just throwing that.
A lot of it was simply the fact that as the American population was getting more middle class at the time, they were voting more and more, less and less Democrat, more and more Republican. By opening up immigration and having another lower class basically fill in that working class niche, the Democratic Party could keep its coalition going and stay in control in Congress. And it did, it wasn't until 1994. I mean, from 1948 to 1994, the Democrats controlled the House. I mean, that is the longest single amount of time that any party has controlled any portion of the American government.
Interesting.
A lot of that was,
guys, someone has like a beeping noise, a beep beep noise. Yeah. Yeah. Keep going, Trent.
All right. But that's how the immigration side worked. I'm going to take us back to World War II.
No worries, man. I was just always curious. So thank you.
All right.
You got to let me immigrant into the Americas.
Hey, look. If the Democrats win the 2028 election, just waltz on over the border, man, and you'll have a hotel and an EBT card and all types of stuff, man. Seriously, there's certain places like Seattle and New York, bro. If you can manage to just get there, you're set. So, I'm serious. Just head on down to Mom and Dommy's New York, and you're great, Matt. So, anyways.
All right. Moving ahead to November 1943. It's a year after the American military captured Japanese radar on Guadalcanal. And MacArthur's people have been yelling, we need purpose-built from the ground up radar ferrets. That is, planes built from the ground up to hunt radars. And two of those aircraft showed up in November and December of 43. They were the Atom Smasher and the Duchess of Paducah. What they did was revolutionize the ability of Section 22 to locate radars. And in addition to that, the U.S. Navy got a couple of PBYs that the U.S. Navy and Section 22 grabbed enough equipment to make as a amphibious ferret that operated with seaplane tenders. And the seaplane tenders could get up closer to Japanese radars to stage this PBY out of. And those three aircraft revolutionized mapping out of Japanese radar systems in the Solomons chain and in New Guinea and all the way into Indonesia. And there was I can't begin to tell you how important these aircraft were. And at the same time, there's a lot of politics going on. The Australians and New Zealanders said, hey, it's looking like we're going to win the war against the Japanese. And they basically put together something called the Canberra Pact and said, basically, get off our lawn. We don't want you Americans in the Solomons and the Central Pacific after the war. And the Americans took one look at that and said, oh, screw you. And
why? Why did the Australians say that?
They were they basically wanted things to be like they were before World War II, where they were part of the greater British colonial empire. Okay. Well, the Americans, one of our foreign policy goals in World War II was disestablishing the British Empire, which we did through Lend-Lease. And I can go into that, but I'll leave that as a side thing. One of the upshots to all of this is suddenly Lieutenant Commander Mace, as head of Section 22, as his assistant director, became persona non grata in the American headquarters, and he got kicked out in lieu of someone else. But that was some of the politics that was going on in the background that you don't hear much about in post-war books. Power. Section 22 evolved further and eventually put together 15 different field units. Right, you're seeing basically a map of where they were located and what they did. And at right is a list of what the field units were and what they operated. You had units that did the SB-24 radar ferrets. You had others that just did teams, like the guy that you saw earlier in the presentation, just sitting in the back of a plane in B-24s. You had a Navy officer named Lieutenant Heron running around as his PBY ferret. You had teams supporting submarines in two different places, in Brisbane and in Fremantle. You had RAF teams out of Darwin. You had teams in B-24s. You had teams with supporting 7th Fleet surface units. You had basically a lot of people spread out across all of the theater doing their local areas, and all that information was being fed back to Brisbane. There were maps being made of where all the Japanese radar were, and current statements sent out to units saying, this is what we think Japanese radars are doing to all the units. All right. This was an intelligence organization that was doing operations and supporting troops, telling them, hey, if you go here, the Japanese radar is going to be here. If you fly at a certain height, you can avoid it. If you fly higher than that, they'll see you. And oh, by the way, don't turn on your IFF. They'll see you at 300 kilometers, 180 miles. Over to you.
Oh, yeah. I was just saying that I just got to add that, guys, you wouldn't catch me dead in one of these bomber planes, or you're hearing a piece of metal flying over the ocean.
No air conditioning, man.
Come on, dude. And then what's even worse, submarines. You're in a metal tin can under the ocean. Come on, dude. I don't like heights. I don't like the ocean, and I'm claustrophobic.
You aren't a submariner.
Sorry, dude. No thanks.
There's a reason why they call submarines coffin ships, eh?
I know. Yeah. Those guys. Here's the thing that people really don't understand. There's a difference between
submariners are a special breed of cat. They are specially selected for a reason.
There's a difference between courage and bravery, right? Bravery is when you kind of like react, and let's just say that you see someone who's about to get hit by a car, right? And you just react, you push them out of the way. Courage is when you actually have time to stop and think, right? And you do said thing anyways. You know what I'm saying? There's a burning building, and you walk along, and you're like, uh-oh, that building's on fire. I wonder, and you actually have time to actually stop and think, and you run in and you do it. You actually think about the consequences, and you do it anyways. And I think there's so much courage that was shown by all the men who were fighting.
These guys were putting their assets on the line every mission.
Yep.
Understand, they were operating in the Southwest Pacific. All right. You could have huge thunderstorms breaking out every afternoon. All right. They were flying over mountains that had 0 visibility. I mean, cumulus rock. Fly into a cloud, hit a mountain. A lot of planes disappeared that way. All right. These guys were going out every day, flying near where the enemy radars were located, trying to find them, trailing their coats, hoping the Japanese did not send an airplane out to kill them. You know, that is, you've got to have a pair of big brass ones to do that day after day. And a lot of these guys just never came back.
Yeah.
All right. By the time Section 22 was doing all those units, it got huge. All right. You're talking, you know, hundreds of people in the headquarters, thousands of people in the various units, not only in the units themselves, but providing the support to get to the units. You've got to have a training cadre. You've got to have people that are doing the warehousing, getting the equipment out to theaters, doing all the reports that go out to people. I mean, and all of this was secret. And I could talk here for a while, but I'm not going to bore you with, you know, you can look at a chart. All right. You have depots, you had research organizations, you had your field organization, you have headquarters doing things and circulating the information to all the people that needed them. All right. And they were also doing things like listening to Allied communications, seeing if there were any breaks, that is, that they were giving out intelligence in the open. That was another thing that was Section 22 was given. And that's simply because they had people that had a high enough clearance with the right equipment. They could listen to our own radios and call out when people were making security breaches. All right. That's just another duty as a sign that was given to them. All right. This is when I get to talk about the Japanese. All right. Over Rabaul, the Allies started to lose bombers at night. All right. And they didn't know why. It turned out there was someone named Commander Yasuna Kazono, and he put together a Japanese night fighter group. Started out with a few airplanes. They were referred to as geckos by the Allies. They were J1N1 twin engine fighters. And what Kano did was he put a pair of 20 millimeters, one shooting up and one shooting down. And when this is before the Germans did, by the way, months, he did this by himself. He was a hell on wheels pilot, and he was an innovator. And when Allied bombers got caught in searchlights that were cued by Japanese radars, he came up either above or behind, above or below, not directly behind, and shot 20 millimeters and started killing bombers. All right. And we started thinking, well, we're hearing Japanese radar on IF frequencies. And some of our bomber crews were saying, hey, we've got night fighters chasing us and our IFS is being pinged. We think they're pinging us. Well, one of the members of Section 22 went in and listened. He said, no, the Japanese aren't using radars, or they aren't using IFF to do it. They're using other things. All right. And he was right at the time, but he was wrong on what would happen eventually. But it was really important because when he was doing this in November 43, 2 months later, there was an audit crew that came in from the Joint Chiefs of Staff trying to prove that Japanese weren't using IFF to hunt down and kill our planes. And also, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. In 1943, the Japanese had a big cruiser force that was sitting in Rabaul. All right. Both the 5th Air Force and the United States Navy from carriers tried to strike at these cruisers. What you're seeing here is pictures from a B-25 strike of a Japanese cruiser with radar. And it had not only early warning radar, it also had a 10 centimeter radar that could see low. And the Japanese knew that they had a gap to the north. And they had this cruiser watching this gap. And they had most of the cruiser force with their engines warm. So when Halsey's carrier strike group came from the Princeton and Saratoga to come in and whack these cruisers, they started moving very quickly. And the Japanese didn't manage. the Americans didn't manage to sink these cruisers, but they managed to damage enough of them so the cruiser force did not come down to Bougainville to try and stop an American landing that had just happened there. But Section 22 played a huge role in telling Halsey's people where this radar gap was to the north, and they also took these photographs that you see here. These photographs were used in naval intelligence throughout all of the Second World War. What you see at upper right is a flak map. The Japanese put more flak batteries at Rabaul than anywhere else outside of Tokyo.
I heard that. Interesting. And that's why. Ah, okay.
Yeah. They were trying to protect those ships. They were trying to protect the airfields. They were protecting troops and supplies. All right. But the Japanese, they originally didn't have enough radar. So what they did is they grabbed radars off of airplanes. And at the bottom right of you see that they put together special antennas that, that they cobbled together for those aircraft radars. And they use them to spot the IFF off of our aircraft. So remember, Cooper said, we're not, they're not using IFF on the night fighters. Well, they were using them on those ground-based radars. And they were cueing the Japanese ground defense guns to be pointing in the right direction, to point the searchlights in the right directions. They weren't using IFF for the night fighters. They were using them for the searchlights the night fighters were using.
Oh.
This, by the way, is something that the British did early on in fighting German night bombers, and which the Germans did against British night bombers before they got radars on their aircraft. The Japanese took a lot longer to get radars on their aircraft. All right, come on. In February and April of 44, there was a major, I refer to as the Great South Pacific IFF visitation. The Joint Chiefs of the Americans and the combined chiefs with the British sent out teams to the South Pacific, the Central Pacific, India, the Mediterranean, North Africa, and they audited the use of identification friend or foe, trying to get a standardized use of the systems. And there were lots of things going on where people were saying, the IFF is being used by the Axis to hunt us down. And basically, the high command, the flag ranks of the British and the Americans said, no, you're going to use IFF the way we tell you, and don't tell us that the Axis is doxing you with IFF. We don't believe it. We're not going to believe it. Well, in fact, it's what happened. But what came down was basically, damn it, you're going to do what we tell you or else. And what you see at right was one of the results. This came out of a U.S. Navy publication that is sent to its sailors and its pilots saying, you're screwing up the use of IFF, quit it. And that, basically at that point on, the flag ranks from April of 44 until like June of 45, we're not listening to any evidence that the Germans and the Japanese were using IFF to track Allied aircraft. And it got a lot of pilots killed. And what you're seeing here is how the Germans were using searchlights. They call it Wild South. The Japanese did the same things at Rabaul. All right. The same tactics were invented independently by the British, by the Germans, by the Japanese. We, the Americans, copied the British method and actually used it in the Pacific to do the same tactic. Basically, if you have the same tools and the same military mission and smart people in good organizations that are well trained, they will come up with the same tactics over and over again with the same equipment. It's just what smart people do.
Someone says, why do we have to learn about these two events in school? Because they're part of history. Okay?
Because the Holocaust was the first time that we saw a nation state decide that we're going to do ethnic genocide.
Well, right? I mean, that we've recognized in the West.
Yes.
Remember, there was groups, in India and the Middle East and Africa. There's other places where this happened. But just like you had said about the, industrialized and all this other stuff, why like you and Matt and Fenris had talked about why World War II was so fascinating. It's just because there were so many firsts when it came to urbanization, mechanization, and all this other stuff. This was the first time that happened in this particular context. You know what I'm saying?
The difference between the Holocaust as done by Mustache Man's people and others is it's very well documented as a policy of a nation state. It's not like someone giving blankets with smallpox to the Indians locally because they wanted to, and the disease did all the work.
Okay, question for you though.
There's some. Sorry, just to interrupt there. You know that there's some questions about that.
Yeah, but about which part?
Well, about the so-called Holocaust of Mustache.
Okay. Yeah, but let's not talk about that. What I'm saying is
the difference with the Mustache Man people and others is the level of documentation that was captured and the industrial facilities that were created to dispose of the victims.
Yeah, Germans and Japanese are meticulous about record keeping, and that's why their atrocities were so thoroughly documented, right? I mean, look at Germans now. But my point is the whole smallpox thing. Germ theory was not a thing. Like people didn't understand viruses. So there's historians that are saying, did they actually intentionally give these people these things to wipe them out? Because remember, even like the flu, chicken pox, other things wiped out tons and tons of Africans and natives. So they didn't really need to use smallpox blankets when a regular common cold would wipe out whole swathes of people. So that was one thing that I kind of looked into where you can't say that. I'm not saying that any of us are actually saying this, but we can't say that we recognize that germ theory and learning about how viruses and stuff passed back and forth was not a thing until the late 1800s or the early 1900s, and then still talk like, oh, we just knew how to use the blankets with smallpox as a weapon.
It was understood that people who were well that were given dirty blankets from people who were sick with smallpox tended to get it. But that's about all they knew.
Yeah. So, okay.
They didn't have the germ theory of disease.
Yeah, the 1890s, it was established in the 1860s and the 1880s, and then the 1890s is when they really had a firm kind of understanding of this whole thing. So
it took time for the knowledge to get spread institutionally, and you basically had to wait for people who were taught in the old ways to die off before the new knowledge was really spread widely and became accepted. That's just the way that science works. Science advances one death at a time because you're waiting for the people that believe in the old things that aren't true to be replaced by the people with the new knowledge. The thing that makes war different from normal peacetime medicine is you've got to there is a huge benefit for being a first adopter and getting it right. And getting it right first means you win battles, and you win enough battles, you win a war. So that's why technology advances, because you've got megadeath that's forcing you to adapt or die. That's just the way war works. It's the ultimate call of a civilization. Every civilization today is a civilization that was a winner in a war. Because if you lost enough wars, you disappeared. All right. This is when I talk about technological change. Remember I said how people had to fly around and around trying to figure out by ear where things were? In the summer of 1944, they got directional antennas and nice oscilloscopes where they could steer the antenna figure out where the power was, and take various cuts, where a directional cut. I'm flying, and this particular direction at this azimuth, I have a strong radar signal, and I do it from another place where I know I'm at, and I get a strong signal. If you've got two lines from two known positions that cross over, you figured out where the bad guy is. And in the summer of 44, after all of this fighting around with headphones, trying to figure out where things were, losing people because you have to trail your coat too close to enemy aircraft, you finally had the ability to locate by direction finding on an aircraft. And suddenly things got a lot more efficient, and there were much less losses in the ferrets trying to find these things. And this is where I'm going to say, remember I told you earlier that the Americans were copying from the British? We also copied from the New Zealanders, because they had physicists that first built radars for Admiral Halsey and then moved on over to the Southwest Pacific under MacArthur and started running radar intercept missions with a squadron of the 13th Air Force called the 868th Bomb Squadron. And you see it right. R.S. Unwin and E.R. Collins. These are two New Zealand physicists that revolutionized in the 13th Air Force the finding of Japanese radars using the latest American equipment. And these people train, first they got the equipment working with specialized antennas that covered the relevant frequencies, because the equipment they got from the United States were built for Germans, and they modified them to cover Japanese frequencies with proper antennas. And these guys were hell on wheels and were a major portion of what Section 22 did in the Southwest Pacific. When the United States in the Southwest Pacific made the jump to the Philippines, they trod on Admiral King's toes very hard, because MacArthur and Spencer, looking at this leap, said, we need a naval guy in charge of Section 22 when we make the leap to the Philippines, because the Navy is going to be the lead service running the invasion. And they need to know where the Japanese radars are. And they need to know everything about how Japanese radar might trigger IFF. Well, Jolly was put in charge as the assistant director of Section 22 for the leap. And based on information that he got back from U.S. Navy land-based anti-submarine aircraft, he said, hey, we have had enough evidence to say that the Japanese really are pinging our IFF. And he sent out a document to all of 7th Fleet, to all of 3rd Fleet, to all of the 5th Air Force, detailing this. And not only was this contrary to Admiral King's Great Southwest Pacific visitation, all right, he was trying to get, and he got in October of 44, complete control of identification, friend or foe, for the Navy. Well, October, November was the invasion of Leyte. This guy that you see in the upper right, he had a U.S. Navy doctor come up, tap him on the shoulder. You're having too much stress. You're going home. That is, he was stolen out of Section 22 because King, this guy stomped on King's feet too hard, organizationally. And there are reasons why this is important. In the run-up to the invasion in late October, November, going into Leyte, 5th and 13th Air Force were trying to destroy the refineries in Balikpapan, because intelligence at the time said they were doing all the high-octane gasoline necessary for Japanese air power in the Philippines. And there were 3 major raids. The first 2 raids were completely torn to pieces because Japanese radar gave Japanese Army and Navy units at Balikpapan enough time to get to altitude to chew up the raids. And, basically, Section 22 was brought in after the first two raids were chewed to pieces. And they came in with a radar spoof that brought up the Japanese aircraft. And in the meantime, someone by the name of Charles Lindbergh had come along, and he taught 5th Air Force P-47 crews how to fly their airplanes at well over 600 nautical miles. And they flew just behind this radar spoof. And when the Japanese airplanes came up to get what it thought was an incoming formation of B-24s, it had a bunch of P-47 Lightnings drop on them because of this spoof that Section 22 put together on the third raid. And when the third raid came in, the Japanese had been broken up. They had P-38s with the B-24s, and they leveled the refinery there, such that the Japanese didn't have a lot of high-octane gasoline for the Leyte invasion. The problem was, since Section 22 was on Admiral King's naughty list, the Navy chain of command would not listen to Section 22's warnings that they found the southern and central attack forces of the Japanese Navy coming into Leyte. All right. Lieutenant Heron, in his ELINT PBY, spotted the Japanese fleet coming out of Borneo. And he warned his tender when he came back, the Japanese are coming. Well, the captain of the tender said, none of my other airplanes saw this. I don't believe you. You're on King's naughty list. I'm not going to pass this on. So the escort carrier force that got hit by the center force could have had its planes attacking incoming Japanese battleships if they had listened to Section 22 and sent search planes out where Section 22 said they were coming from. All right. This is one of the reasons why you didn't know about Section 22 in the aftermath of World War II, because the Navy.
When did they declassify these?
The information I'm talking to you about was declassified in the 1990s.
Wow.
So
wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. And it really wasn't discovered at large scale until I ran this group 2012 to about 2018.
Wow. Can I just someone says, why do we dwell in the past when the modern times say, God, bro, if you're playing chess, right? And you're getting good at chess, you have to go back and research all the grand masters and all the best matches of the last however many 100 years so that you can learn the game and you can learn strategy. If you're boxing, you got to go back and look at Ali and Frazier and all of them. That matters because, guys, once again, you have to educate yourself on a topic so that you can actually practice said thing or you can win. Guys, you have to learn about what's happened in the world and in life so that you can win at life. Guys, even
those who don't know the mistakes of the past are doomed to repeat them.
Yes, we are in a modern times, but you think that people are that much different when it comes to our selfish pursuits and selfish aims as they were 200 years ago? No, we have better technology, yes, but people really don't change that much. We are a basic human animal with our own selfish wants and desires. Now, when you talk about the past, you have to be careful to actually make people understand what past historical events affect them to this day and which ones don't and which ones should actually be. Okay, guys, the whole the slavery thing. I'm so tired of hearing about slavery. I'm so tired of it. If I see one more 12 years a slave or any of that, guys, I'm so tired of it. Teach in schools as part of a curriculum because it is part of our history, but I don't want to see another movie. I don't want to see another show. And for these people who use it to try and browbeat and guilt white people, you bring up history as a way to educate people and not to shame, insult, or guilt people. And that's what's going on nowadays with our curriculum, is using every single solitary historical event and flipping it so white people bad. That's the issue. Instead of just saying this happened, it is what it is, right? They're trying to say, oh, well, somehow the Europeans were that much more evil than everyone else. Somehow America has been so much more evil than all the other superpowers and world powers and empires. Come on, man. You cannot make that argument. So back to you, my friend.
All right. Well, look, at some point, everyone has been bad in history. Every ethnic group has been bad at one point. That's just the nature of history. The reality is, learn from your past, try and do better. That's all anyone can do. All right. I'm going to talk to you again. Once the physicists that I talked about earlier started looking around, they needed more intercept aircraft. And they decided, well, we can't get more B-24s, but we can get a B-25. And they tricked out this airplane you see at the bottom right. It was a dedicated ferret, and it was called the Beautiful Ohio. And it flew its first mission in February of 44 November of 44 with RCM observers. And they were doing, as the B-24s were in the Philippines, this B-25 was in New Guinea, and then later the Philippines, doing the same mission. They needed numbers to find more radars because, as I showed you earlier in the presentation, the Japanese had a whole buttload of radars in the Philippines, and they had to be mapped. A little later, in February 45, the 7th Fleet interrogated a POW who was from the flagship of the center force that attacked our escort carriers off of Leyte. He was from the Otago. And it turned out Otago was a really, really, really special flagship. She not only had a lot of search radars, she had 2 microwave radars that were integrated into the gunnery of the ships. They had a combat information center, and they were also outfitted with radio search receivers. If it weren't for the fact that USS Darter had sunk this cruiser as the center force was closing onto the Philippines, the Japanese would have had this thing sitting at Leyte, and it would have given them accurate data as to the escort carriers being escort carriers and not fleet carriers, which is what Admiral Kurita thought. If Admiral Kurita had been sitting on that ship, he would have just utterly destroyed that force because he would have had accurate information from the best radar ship in the Japanese Navy. And oh, by the way, its guns were carrying radar chaff. They had shells that dropped chaff. They exploded in the air and dropped decoys that could have been used on American ships. This was something that was kept from Section 22, downstream of King not liking Section 22. There was an ongoing fight between King and MacArthur over IFF in World War II. And it underscored a whole lot of the politics of what was going on between the Navy and MacArthur. And Marshall didn't really support MacArthur as much as he should have, because frankly, he wanted IFF to work too. But King got so bad at one point that Marshall really had to support MacArthur, because King attacking MacArthur was undermining his own political power in the army. So it's one of those, as a lesson, sometimes the enemy of my enemy isn't my friend. He's my enemy, but sometimes he's my co-belligerent against somebody else. And this is a perfect allegory on the way military bureaucracies and how any bureaucracy works under pressure. Mm-hmm. When we talk, why do we study these things? This is a good example of the kind of stupidity that otherwise really smart people get up to when power is involved. When power and money are involved, cheating is normal. It is standard operating procedure. And if you think differently, you're a fool. All right. After the success of beautiful Ohio, the B-24 I showed earlier in 13th Air Force, 5th Air Force, the guy there said, okay, I need another one to support 5th Air Force operation. And Captain Victor Tatelman, he's the guy, the pilot of the plane, you see it right, had been sent back to the United States to be trained up on radar intercept equipment. And he came back with that, and he saw what 13th Air Force was doing, and he convinced Section 22 and 5th Air Force headquarters to give him a plane to go back to his old fighter and bomber group and go out and hunt radars with them. And that's what he did for most of World War II out of the Philippines. And, Field Unit 13, it's like, okay, we still need a longer range airplane. And they basically got an overage aircraft that was surplus from a squadron. They tarted it up as another ad hoc ferret, except rather than being just one guy in back, they completely rebuilt the bomb bay to have a section where they could run those physicists to go out and hunt radar. So basically, you had two B-24s and two B-25s and a B-24 that they created locally, in addition to those two B-24s that were sent from the United States hunting radars. And 3 of them were basically as downstream of those 2 New Zealand physicists doing their job.
Now, were those physicists military guys?
Yes, they were originally physicists in New Zealand. They were seconded and made officers.
Oh, cool.
And originally they were there providing radars to, that were made in New Zealand to Admiral Halsey as the head as a theater commander of the Southern Pacific. But when they had the Canberra Pact thing come up, it's like the Navy, New Zealanders are persona non grata. And MacArthur said, I'll take them. And they wound up in Section 22 in the Southwest Pacific. It's just politics works like that. All right. In May of 45, we saw Section 22 take elements from 5th Air Force and 13th Air Force and combine them in the most technologically sophisticated air raid done by American air power in World War II. Every aircraft you see in the upper right was a B-24 that had a radar, that had a specialized radar bombing system, and one of them was a ferret, and 4 of them were ad hoc ferrets. They had more technological sophistication in this one air raid over Indonesia. And basically, you had high altitude aircraft come in and drop chaff. This got the Japanese shooting at high altitude at the ferrets that were trailing their coat. Then you had radar aircraft with low-level bombing kit come in and slam ships in the harbor while the Japanese were shooting high. Then behind them came one more wave of aircraft with napalm dropped from bomb racks. Basically, they took 55-gallon drums. They put fuses with white phosphorus and wooden tail fins on them, and they dropped them on the warehouses in surrounding the harbor where the ships were burning from the earlier attack, and they could see the warehouses, and set those on fire. It was the single most sophisticated airstrike done by the United States Army Air Force in World War II, and it's got almost zero recognition because it happened in MacArthur's Theater rather than in Europe, where the bomber barons were. All of this technological sophistication, the stuff about IFF, the stuff that the most sophisticated airstrikes were happening in the Southwest Pacific and not in Europe, was extraordinarily bad for a lot of political careers and for a lot of post-war budgets. So basically everything related to Section 22 went into the secret round file, and nothing about it made it to the standard narrative that came out in November, between November 45 and March of 47. All right. They were basically squeegeed out of the narrative of World War II because they were too inconvenient for careers and budgets. All right. This happens. People are like that in war. And the organization that I had basically spent 5 or 6 years trolling all the archives in New Zealand, in Australia, the United States, and hell, a little bit in Japan, finding out what these people did and documenting it. And there were several articles that showed up in publications. One of our guys wound up getting his, not only his master's, but his PhD in Section 22. And basically, we mapped these people and added this history to the narrative of the Second World War. And basically, Section 22 ran from May of 43 to August of 45. It did 27 monthly reports on the Japanese. It did 42 special reports on Japanese radar technology, receivers, organization training, and 303 current statements of immediate actionable intelligence that were sent to military organizations, U.S. Army, Air Force, U.S. Navy, U.S. Army, the Royal New Zealand Air Force, the Royal Australian Air Force, the Royal New Zealand Navy, Royal New Zealand Air Force, the New Zealand Air Force and Navy, which were part of the Southwest Pacific, and the U.S. Marine Corps. All of these organizations were treated with this intelligence information. And this organization's existence was squeegeed out of the narrative of World War II because they were inconvenient for budgets and inconvenient for careers. And the people that I worked with, we together mapped all of this and put it into the narrative of World War II. It's slowly being added, since we finished this up in 2018. In the time since, there have been multiple different books that have come out using this information on World War II that we put together. And mission accomplished as far as I say. Over to you.
Hold on, guys. Give me 1 second. Hold on.
Now, I haven't been tracking the stuff on YouTube because I've been talking from StreamYard. So I'll leave that to you.
Yeah. So guys, one thing that I can say is this. People have this weird thing. Okay. Everything that we've been talking about to lead this back to like the point of my channel, this is in a different universe than what women think about. It's crazy. You guys remember that whole thing where they were like, ask your boyfriend how often he thinks about the Roman Empire, or how many times he thinks about whatever. Guys, us guys think about war and conflict and tribalism because that's what men are programmed to do. We have women on podcasts that actually say that women are the primary victims in war, which is absolutely insane. That a woman that's husband dies in a war has more trauma than her husband who was blown to bits. It's just crazy. They have no concept of conflict, of loss, of violence, of any of that stuff, and then wonder why men are more educated on things that make us more money. Why we make more money at work, it says we see all of our coworkers as competition and realize that anything worth having, you have to fight for it. You know, how many times have you heard chicks say that they won't even? Kevin Samuels asked one chick, if there was 3 of your friends and you and one high value great guy, would you cut your friends off at the knees to get him? And they said no. So women would rather all lose than compete and get what they want. It makes no sense. We let the patients run the asylum, man. And it's getting bad out here because things are getting better. They really, really are. So let me see here. Hold on, guys. Hold on. Yeah, guys. There's a Grady Judd story. Do you see that? Where he was like, "Oh yeah, we shot the guy like a lot." I have to pull that one up here pretty soon. But Trent, do you have any other projects that you're working on as far as historian wise?
Well, I have done 3 other presentations for the World War II TV channel. One of them was about a radar operator at Guadalcanal that quite literally saved the American air campaign. He was, I call him the horseshoe nail of victory. He was quite literally the difference between victory and defeat in the air over Guadalcanal. I did another one on the electronic warfare portion of the invasion of Sicily in the Mediterranean theater in 43. I've also done a very long one on Okinawa. I've got 4 very long threads that I put on Twitter X in 2020 and 2021 about the Okinawa campaign. And these are what I focus on is radar and electronic warfare and signals and all of the logistics behind those things to try and provide another level to World War II, to provide the technological side of the war. Because let's be honest, a lot of the stuff that was technological, they kept classified until the end of the Cold War. And the Cold War didn't end until 1989. All of the history that we had up until that time was minus that layer of high-level technological churn of the fight between really smart men trying to control the electromagnetic spectrum, to point airplanes at other airplanes, to point ships at ships, to point aircraft at ships and submarines, to get submarines to where enemy shipping was so they could kill them with torpedoes. That whole level of warfare is just pretty much glossed over in most history books. And when you add it to what's going on in World War II, I'll give you an example. In the Southwest Pacific, there was something that I refer to as the Great Radiostatic Blob. All right. We didn't have satellites back then for telecommunications. We either had cables or we had high frequency radio, which bounced radio waves off the ionosphere. And because the ionosphere is a reflection, quite literally, of sunlight, that is, sunlight charges the upper atmosphere so you can bounce radio waves off it. It varies through the course of the day, and you've got to completely measure it so you can get the radio signals to where you need them. Pearl Harbor was warned from Washington that an attack was coming because we had intercepted the Japanese diplomatic code. The problem was radio atmospherics. If you watch that movie, Tora Tora Tora, there's a section in it where they say, there's something wrong with the radio atmospherics. We can't get the message to them. So let's send it by telegram. Well, they sent it by telegram, but someone didn't put the right priority on it. So the admiral sitting in the Pearl Harbor, gets a message from Washington 5 hours after the attack happened. And if the radio frequencies had been right, if they had predicted which radio frequencies were working correctly, he would have gotten that message hours and hours before, and at least, had his aircraft up in the air, because this is an immediate war warning, take action. Well, the immediate war warning showed up after the Japanese attacked. That is one of the things that was going on. One of the things that was left out was MacArthur's people, because they were operating a radiostatic blob, wound up, the Australian physicists working with his headquarters solved that problem. And that solution was ported to conferences in London in April of 44 and Washington in May of 44. No, actually, March in London and April in the United States. And that information was used for the invasion of Normandy. A lot of the radio techniques, near vertical incident skywave, basically shooting high frequency radio waves directly straight above and bouncing it off so it comes straight down, allowed you to work inside of valleys, work inside, between steep buildings, and get high frequency radio to people on the ground. And you could cover a 300-mile area. This would enable radars to talk to aircraft, to control them, tell them take off from here, go find the enemy. We wound up, we being the Western Allies, because of the information that MacArthur's people ported to those two events, it was used in the planning of the Normandy invasion. And the 11th Fighter Sector, 11th Fighter Sector was talking to the Allied fleet going to Normandy and to the radars that were set up in Normandy the first day through the radio techniques that MacArthur's people discovered using Australian physicists and spread around the world. All right. All of that are things that were unknown because the requisite documents were classified until 1989.
Yeah. Well, people are also shocked that, guys, where did a lot of the German and Japanese scientists go after World War II ended?
U.S.
Thank you very much. The Soviets caught some of the German ones also, but a lot of the Germans fled west because they wanted to be taken prisoner by the Americans, because you do not want to be taken prisoner by the Russians. No. But people don't realize that a lot of our basis for modern medicine and a lot of these things come from what was going on in Germany at the time.
People don't like to admit that a lot of the things that happened in the Holocaust, in terms of Mustache Man's crazy doctors doing really nasty things, wound up being used to save lives later.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that medicine really doesn't want to talk about. But if the information is there and it can save lives, well, by gum, you save lives.
Yeah.
Even if it's touched by evil, trying to ameliorate the evil by saving lives later, I think is the best way to go in this.
Yeah, I think people just don't know anything. The fact that so my mom, she was born and raised like in the Jim Crow South, right? And people hyperbolically talk like things are just as bad now as they were then, and she just laughs because she lived through it. And now we have it so good that people can just be so they can exaggerate things nowadays. But the people who lived through this stuff, they're like, you guys are absolutely crazy. It's like people who grew up in countries where there's actual war. And then they laugh at people in the United States, like, oh, violence and this and that. It's like our kids don't have to worry about stepping on landmines here.
Amen.
So,
well, I mean, look, things are so much. AJ, you probably know this better than I. There was a black town in Oklahoma that got burned down during Jim Crow. I mean, secret public violence, lynching.
But here's the thing,
postcards of it.
Trent, that I have to say is that we sure do like to define the black experience by just the South. There was no Jim Crow in Harlem or in New York, Boston, Chicago, LA. There was black people all around the United States, many of whom had a completely different experience than Mississippi, Louisiana, whatever. But why do we only talk about the South? Because it keeps that victimhood going. Or like Oklahoma with like Black Wall Street and stuff. Why? Because they don't want to talk about the fact that there was a Harlem Renaissance and other things where you had blacks living just fine.
Look, and Black Americans had a higher rate. African Americans had a higher rate of family formation, husband wife, than whites until we got the 1960s welfare, and subsidizing single mothers destroyed two-parent families in the African American community, and is doing that right now in every other community in American society. If you subsidize single motherhood, you get more of it. If you subsidize divorce for women, which is what family courts do, you get more of it.
Yeah, I just think that there's way more to history than just Jim Crow and slavery.
You're not going to have me argue that.
But that's what the current, leftist agenda just promotes. And the idea, all right, there was a whatever podcast clip, and this one girl, she was pulling the whole black people can't be racist. It's like, of course we can't, right?
What?
And there was an Asian girl on there, and he was saying, look, do you think black people, if a black person does something to another minority, is that racist? And the girl goes, no. And the Asian girl goes, are you kidding? Black people are racist to Asians all the time. And it's true. It's true. It's absolutely true. Guys,
AJ?
Racism can be considered prejudice plus power. But that is contextual. Because if you're a white kid in an all-black school, guess what? In that context, they have the prejudice and the power. If you're in Chinatown and you're the only white guy and I'm the only black guy, Trent, guess what? If they jump us, that's prejudice plus power. You can't say that every single situation whites always have the power. It doesn't make any sense. So, what were you saying?
I lived in Houston in the 90s. All right. I can't begin to tell you the animosity between African American women and Vietnamese women.
Yeah.
Because I have never seen so many African American men get Asian fever like I've seen them when the Vietnamese young women showed up in the salsa dancing clubs that the African American men were in. And oh my God,
yeah, that's one thing. These B-dubs, they act like they own us black men. They don't want to do what it takes to actually keep.
I have never seen.
Here's the thing, Trent. Okay, where I'm from, white women hate Asian women the same way because they think that all the successful competitive white dudes marry Asian chicks, and it's true in Seattle. And then international women are to Western women. I mean, Eastern women are to Western women what white women are to black women. You know how black women hate white women because they think that they steal their men? That's how Western women view Asian women and etc. They think that they should be the only choice. So when men go and actually go where we're wanted, all of a sudden it's a crime. It's ridiculous. So, but yeah, guys. What were you saying, Trent?
Well, I was going to say something, but go ahead, do your thing.
But yeah, guys, go where you're wanted, right? If you honestly want to get married and have kids, guys, you need to go find where there's women who were raised to prioritize said things. I say this, guys, Asian women are the most married, the least divorced, they're the highest earning, and the most educated. So, guys, education and career doesn't exclude Asians and Indians from getting married. Why? Because those women prioritize marriage just as much as they prioritize their degrees. A lot of any women, the idea of not being married is just an anathema to them. It's crazy.
Make sure you two, I don't know, Trent or AJ, somebody, you send an American 304 with $250,000 of student debt my way. I'll take that. I'll save them.
Good luck with that. So, but all right, you guys, I'll shut this down, guys. I will be live tomorrow, but as I'll be on the men's table on Jeff St. James's channel at 8:30 on Wednesday, as usual, guys. I'll do that from now on, so I'll stream that over here. And then, guys, the Thursday live is gonna start at 6, and it'll be me, Jeff St. James, and Black Spider Guy. Advice: he's a very, 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 very large content creator, and we're gonna talk about these women marrying themselves. Have you guys heard of this?
Oh yeah, monogamy. That's what it's called.
No. They're marrying themselves.
Yeah, didn't they call it monogamy?
No. Monogamy is two people having, sex with each other only. That's monogamy. You know what I'm saying? Okay. Yeah. But they're just literally throwing themselves a stupid ceremony. So I did a video on this years ago. Hold on, let me pull this up here. Hold on. What was that? Mary's. Let me see. Married herself. Let's see. Huh. Is it? Yes. So I did this video like so long ago. Hold on. So this 77-year-old chick married herself. 77-year-old Ohio woman marries herself, says, "This is what I've always wanted." Is this not the most pathetic thing that you've ever seen in your entire life? Look at this.
The churches now.
Oh my God.
I did another video of this like super young chick, and she's just like, "Oh my God, I just, I feel just so great." Please, cooked. So, but all right, you guys, I'll shut this down. Trent, thanks, man. Keep those other 3 presentations, man, and we'll just go one by one here, because this is some interesting stuff. And the fact that, once again, we're learning more and more about World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. Every year there's some new documents that were classified. Unclassified, There's all these things out there, and people experience this stuff. People live this. This is real. This is not a movie. Men went out there and did this, died for this, So, and they deserve to be recognized. So, but all right, you guys, I appreciate you. Take it easy. Bye, guys.
Take care.